Created live on Fireside.
I'm going to introduce YNS Live with NFL Thread. My name is Juliette Hahn. I am here with my co-host, Cynthia Zordich, and we have Sarah and Chris Carr. Welcome, guys. How are you?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you so much. It's always so exciting. The pivot issue is near and dear to my heart, especially after working on my project when my husband was leaving, When the Clock Runs Out, where I interviewed several players about transitioning out of the game. To me, it's the most important story to tell current players and spouses about how we transition through and how we handle it. And your story is incredible. So thank you so much for joining us today to talk about transitioning into the game, your life before the game, your life during, and what you guys are doing now. So thanks for jumping on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to take it back. My favorite thing is kind of to take it back and give a little background of both of yours, like where you grew up a little bit about your childhood. If we could start there, and whoever wants to start first, if Chris, you want to start, or Sarah, you want to start, you guys can fight to who starts first.
I'll go ahead and start.
You can start.
I grew up in Reno, Nevada. So very far from where I live today. I grew up with my mother and my two older sisters. My father lived in the Bahamas and Florida my whole life. But I had a great childhood. We're a lower class family, but I was always happy. We always had food on the table, and we had enough clothes, and we had the basic necessities, and we had fun. So I grew up there. I met a lot of great people there. I still have some best friends that I have from my childhood, from elementary school, and some people that I didn't go to high school with, but I played football with. I'm still really good friends with them. I was very fortunate to go to a powerhouse football school in high school that taught really good values and ethics about it being bigger than the individual. There was no individual awards. There was no names on the back of your jerseys. There was no celebrating about yourself. It was all about the team. And so I look back, even though I think of Reno now that it's not the best place in the world. I hate to admit it. Like, I'm not one of those people that is just so biased about their hometown that everything is good about it. But I was very fortunate to live there in the time period that I did. Because I met a lot of great people that had a major impact in my life, positive impact.
I love that. Yeah, thank you for sharing. So, Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing and where you grew up?
So I grew up in Challis, Idaho, which is a very small town, like central Idaho, 1,000 people in my town. And my family were cattle ranchers. So I grew up on a ranch. My closest neighbor was like miles away. And so it was like, my parents ended up getting divorced when I was like 10. And so then we moved like in town, but I spent most of my like childhood riding horses, and I did a lot of like horse showing, 4-H, that type of thing. It was, in my opinion, like such an ideal childhood of like, you had your animals, and, you worked hard, you learned hard work just through taking care of, your animals and things like that. And my mom was one of 8 children. So I had 26 first cousins who were like all my best friends. And we had like, gotten to a ton of shenanigans and had a lot of fun. And where I lived, there was only one elementary school, one middle school, one high school. My mom was a elementary school teacher, and I played sports like in high school, but once we went to college, I was like done with that. And I have like 2 siblings. I have a younger brother and a younger sister. So that's kind of
nice.
My childhood in a nutshell.
Yeah, I love that. Can you guys tell us a little bit about when you met? So take us through that a little bit.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
So we met. Oh, do you want to go? Okay, sorry. So we met It was my girlfriend's actually birthday. It was a Wednesday. I remember it was a Wednesday night because I was taking a summer school chemistry class that was like a nightmare. It was like 3 hours a day lecture, and then I had a 4-hour lab. And so she was like, do you want to go out for my birthday? It was like literally the last thing I ever wanted to do, but it was her birthday. So I was like, okay. So we went out to a club in Boise, and that's where Chris and I met. He just came and asked me to dance.
Yeah, Chris,
and I wanted to like leave the whole night. And then he came up like right at the end of the night and was like, do you want to dance? And then my friend was like, oh, I'm ready to go. So I was like, oh, do you want to just walk me to my car? And he was like, okay. He's like, can I get your number? And I was like, well, I don't have anything to write it on. And he was like, oh, I'll remember it. And I was like, okay, sure. And he called the next day. He remembered it.
Wow,
So
I love
how we
that.
met.
Yeah, I love that.
She was lucky because at the time she didn't know that I don't go out very often. So we met. Yeah, it was by chance. Being a person that traditionally doesn't go outside the house too often. I was very fortunate that we met that night.
Yeah, that's funny. Both of you were feeling the same way. You both were kind of reluctant to go, and you end up meeting, which is really incredible when you think about fate in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many different moments in all our lives where we, just stayed home or, both good and bad. It's just very, once you think about it, it's always crazy to think about those moments.
Yeah, and we talk about
Chris
that. I mean, often.
Almost played.
No, go ahead, Sarah. I think there's a delay. So you finish. So no, you go. So Chris, you said Chris almost played.
Oh, and I was going to say, Chris almost played basketball at a different college, and it didn't end up working out because a kid broke his arm the previous year. So we almost didn't even end up in the same place. So like you're saying, just like how the things work out is crazy in life.
Yeah, the story was the kid, I accepted I verbally committed to go to the University of Portland to play basketball with my best friend from high school because he accepted too. And he ended up going there to play for the University of Portland. But their point guard dropped out of school that year. And so they needed a point guard right away. And they needed to give a scholarship to a point guard. So they ended up finding somebody from Australia who could come. And so they contacted me. This is probably a month after I had already verbally committed and stated that they told me the story, what happened, and they apologized because I no longer had a scholarship available for me. And then after that, it was kind of like all those other basketball schools dropped out because they thought I was going to Portland. And then I was just like, well, if I can play football in college, I'll play football. And I actually saw that guy from Australia at my best friend's wedding. And I thanked him. I was like, because it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be in the NFL right now.
Oh my gosh.
It's just like one of those stories how, I would have been a mediocre, hardworking basketball player in college. But I liked basketball more growing up. So it was the best thing for me, even though at the time I was very disappointed.
Yeah, I can imagine I have kids that play sports. I have 3 kids, and my middle son is a basketball player. And so I know when you have these kind of expectations as you're growing up, and if you have skill and you're like, okay, I know I want to do this, and to be young, to be, able to pivot. I know you're kind of talking in a very light manner, but I'm sure it was pretty devastating if you're thinking you're going to do this and all of a sudden you're a kid and you're like, okay, now I have to pivot. Can you take us through what you kind of think, how did you get through that at the level? Again, you were like, I wanted to play football, but if someone's listening to this and thinking about their life trajectory, what tools can you give them that you kind of like honed in on to get you through that?
Yeah, looking back at that, probably for about 2 months, I was very disappointed because basketball was everything to me when I was younger. Football was important too, but basketball, definitely, there was a different level of love and commitment to basketball. But I think the one thing that I had in my mind is that I didn't have any illusions. Well, now I think about it now, it wasn't an illusion. I didn't have any dreams or I didn't think I was going to play professional sports. Even though I was by far the best football player in the state, nobody, nobody had ever come from Reno and played in the NFL besides like a couple of linemen from the early 80s that before I was born. And so at the time, I was just like, well, all these great players that I saw that went to school with my older sister, they never went to major football programs. And I knew that all the best players and athletes, they live in Florida, they live in California, they live in Texas. So I had this realistic view in the sense that, well, I'm really good here, but I'm not going to play in the NFL, right? And I'm not going to play in the NBA. So my big thing was I really want to get a scholarship so I can have my school paid for. But I've always been kind of like, my focus is always forward in that I don't really focus on what could have been, or it's like, this is your life now and you have to make the best of it now.
I love that.
And so I've always had that attitude. And I remember when I was at Boise State, my freshman year, I didn't like it very much. And I was the only freshman that wasn't redshirting. So I wasn't around the older athletes because I was staying on campus, while all the other athletes who were fresh in my age who lived in my dorm rooms, they were going out partying and doing all this stuff, which I couldn't do and didn't want to do anyways. So it was just a very lonely, different time. But I remember one guy asked me, he's like, do you miss high school? Do you miss being the man and everyone knowing you? I was like, no. He's like, you like it here? I was like, no. I was like, but this is life now. I was like, I have to try to make the best of it now. And so I think having kind of like that positive attitude of looking forward and like how am I going to fix or improve the situation that I have now, and appreciating things, because it's one thing to not be able to go play college basketball at a place. It's another to lose your mother or to be diagnosed with cancer or, something major, right? And so it's kind of like one of those good problems, like, oh, I could play college basketball or college football. And really appreciating that, because things could have been much worse.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That's really important. Sarah, I want to kind of throw it back to you. Were you surprised that Chris remembered your number and called you?
Yeah, for sure. Because, I don't know. I feel like, you never know if like someone's like serious or like they're just, asking your number to ask or whatnot. And so, and I also was like, I feel like when you're younger, there's a lot of game playing, like, oh, maybe I won't call her for 3 days or, whatever the case may be. And like, one thing for right off the bat that like Chris was like, yes, I'm interested. And, there wasn't a lot of game playing, and like he's, which was one of the things that was like I was attracted to, is just like, this is who I am. I like you. Like, let's get to know each other and see if, that continues to be like that. So, it was refreshing and surprising.
I love that.
Sarah, I have a question. Being with your background with cattle ranching and growing up with all of your cousins, it doesn't sound like that you were affiliated with the game of football all too much in your childhood, or were you? Like, were you a football fan, or was this a new world for you as well, entering in? Because, Chris, you were already playing, I'm sure, on the team when you guys met.
Yeah, so it was his sophomore, or going into his sophomore year when we met. Being from a small town, like the football games and like the high school activities were definitely like a thing to do. There wasn't a ton to do in my small town. So I liked football, at the high school level. Like my brother played, it was like the quarterback. So I knew like the rules of the game. And I liked watching like our high school team. And then, as I moved into college, it was also another like social event. I can't say that I like watched it on TV and was like really like an avid fan. And like the NFL in particular would watch like the Super Bowl, but like not really.
So this is a whole new world.
So yeah, I was like familiar with yeah.
So I think we have a delay, which I know it's probably a little tricky for everyone to kind of navigate who's talking and then who's not. No, not at all. It's not your fault at all. It's I think Mercury's in retrograde, and we don't even, if you don't believe in that or you don't know what that is, you can just ignore what I said. But it messes with stuff up here. It messes with the communications. So Sarah, so when you guys, I would love for you to kind of take as early, Chris, maybe you can start with when you were getting recruited, and well, I shouldn't say recruited, when you were going into the draft and all that. Like, when did that come really like, wait, I can actually go to the NFL? As you were saying, you never thought that was something that was on your radar.
Yeah, at the end of my junior year, I felt that because I was at when I was at Boise State, it was the beginning of the program growing. My sophomore year was the first time we were ever ranked in the top 25, and we finished in the top 15 my last 3 years. So at that time, I had played against teams where they had NFL players, right? People that later went on to play in the NFL. And so by the time at the end of my junior year, I felt, oh, wow, like, I think I'm good enough. I'm not sure if I'm going to make it now, but I was like, this actually might be something. Because my mindset before that was just improve, get better. And so I wasn't a pessimist in that I didn't think just because I had come from Reno, Nevada, or I was playing at Boise State that I couldn't compete and I couldn't be good and things would never happen. It was just, I just didn't have this goal that I was going to play in the NFL, or et cetera. My goal was always get better. Like, you see what the standard is. If you don't meet that standard, try to meet it continuously. But once I came to the end of my junior year, we played TCU in a bowl game. I had a really good game. And after that game, I was like, I think this might happen. And then agents started calling me. And then I agreed to sign with my agent like my senior year. And then from that moment, we talked once a week for 10 years straight. After that, and I got better over the summer, and I had a really good first 5 games in the season. Then I broke my collarbone. And then I remember I was crying after that because I was like, this potentially might have been my last game ever playing in my life. But I think that was the impetus in a lot of ways of me really saying to myself, like, don't let this be your last game. And so I really worked hard after that. And I, more so than ever, I was like, okay, this is a goal that you want to accomplish. And then I was an undrafted free agent coming out. And I knew that was going to be difficult for me because I was undersized. I'd started off a corner, but I had switched to playing safety. So I was too small to be a safety. But I hadn't played corner since my freshman year, right? I was really good punt returner, kick returner. And I had missed half of my senior season. So I knew that getting drafted was unlikely, and I knew the chances of making the team when you're an undrafted free agent were slim. But once I got to training camp, we had 2 cornerbacks drafted in the first round. And within 20 minutes of the practice, I felt like I was the best rookie that they had drafted, or I wasn't even drafted, but I felt like I was the best. And so that was the first time in my life where I realized that even though the scouts do a really good job of evaluating players, et cetera, sometimes people are going to slip through the cracks. And then at that moment, I was like, okay, it's really got to be, you can't use an excuse about, you're going to get stigmatized. And I knew that my mistakes were going to garner more criticism than somebody who was a first or second round pick, right? Because if I make a mistake, it's like, oh, well, he's undrafted. We expect him not to be good, right? He's just here just in case somebody gets hurt. Whereas if you're a first round or second round pick, people have invested money into you and time and effort, and they want you to make the team, right? So they're more willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. Accepting my wrong, accepting that it wasn't going to be easy. But I think the belief of knowing in my mind, like, this is how I viewed it. Knowing that I was better than them gave me a lot of confidence going into training camp. And so I think that's why I played so well during training camp, because I always say, like, I'm going to believe my eyes, like if I see it and I understand it, like I'm going to believe that. And so I knew in my heart that I was better than them. But yeah, so that was kind of the journey. It started my junior year. At the end of it, realizing that it was a possibility, but it was kind of like, as the months going on, there was just like more incidents that showed me like, oh, this isn't just a dream, and just gave me more confidence and validated my thoughts from earlier, that what I had thought from the end of my junior year until training camp was the truth.
That's cool. I love that. Cindy, did you want to comment? Oh, no, I thought you were coming in. Yeah, please.
Yes, I definitely would. Part of me feels that because your mindset was about having the confidence and believing in yourself and not so much a dream since childhood, I wonder if that didn't change your focus, that, enabled you to just kind of like excel and just concentrate on being better, and got you there on the field, where emotionally you weren't tied into the game as much as some others that might have dreamt to be an NFL player. It seems like that isn't necessarily seem like it was your dream, but something that you just did very well, and you knew that you did it very well. It just kept taking you, your talent kept taking you. And it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think that's well put. I think that is well put. I've never thought about it that way. But yeah, I think that's definitely true. And I think too, for me, football was never an avenue or sports in general, where it was about acknowledgement. Like, how many girls are watching me play, or how many times have I appeared in the newspaper, right? Or who saw this, right? Mm-hmm. None of that was important to me. And I think Sarah can attest to that too. And I think that's why, if you watch any of my highlights, I barely ever celebrated, unless it was my teammate or someone else doing something. Because my thing was just all about what the job is, what the task is, and getting better, and having pride in whatever you do, and knowing that you have ability and trying to improve that. And in a lot of ways, it alleviates a lot of extra stress. Because I'm not worried about the things that could possibly hold me back, right? I'm just worried about the task at hand. And I think that enabled me to reach more of my potential than most athletes do, because there's a lot of different things, variables in their heads and their mindsets, that I think that might block their development. Whereas I just kind of had this kind of like machine-like focus, like this is just get better, nothing else matters. If you make it, great. If you don't, that's fine too.
Yeah, I love that. I love that question. Yeah, Cynthia, I love that. So Sarah, can you take us through, when Chris was drafted and you guys started, you were in this relationship and he was early in his career, kind of where you were in your life?
Sure. And just to add on to what he said too, I think Chris enjoys the process of getting better, even at anything. He is not so much about the product, but I think like that's like a big part of his personality too, is that like daily he likes to improve himself, or, like he speaks Spanish now, he really likes to. So I think that was like a big part of his personality, and not worrying so much about the outcome, because if you work hard at something every day, you're going to get better at it too. But so I was in dental hygiene school. I'd graduated from Boise State as he was going into the NFL. And so when he said when he broke his collarbone, some of his teammates I lived in an apartment complex, and some of his teammates lived next door to me. And so one of them had driven him home after he had broken his collarbone, and he was like, he took some, I don't know, hydrocodone or something. He's throwing up in your lawn. And so he's like, you need to go get him. So anyways, so I went and got him, and that when I brought him in the apartment, and he was like, I've got to make it to the NFL now. And I was just like, that was like the first I'd ever really heard of him having like that goal. He always wanted to be a lawyer. And so I was like unsure if it was like the drugs talking or if this was like a real thing. And then he did sign with an agent. And I mean, from me, I thought he was like talented, but like, did I really know anything about the NFL? No. Or like, and I, like he said, like when he went to training camp, he was like, I feel like I'm the best one here. And I think Chris is usually pretty good at, I don't think he like overinflates like his talents or, just like in general. So it was kind of like, oh, wow, okay, like, I guess this is happening, And so when he was in Oakland, I was still in Idaho.
And so when, and also I would like to take it even into now, like when you guys were having kids and you were an NFL wife and, and we're going to take it to the pivot because I really want to get to what you guys are doing now, both of you, which I think is, it's really important for players to hear, because we all know that the game is going to end, right? The game is going to end. It's inevitable. I mean, it happens. And so you have to have some sort of thing. So can you take us through that kind of next stage of, when Chris was in the league, when you were starting a family and where you guys were? And either of you can kind of, jump in that.
Yeah. Our first child was born Chris's third year in Baltimore. And that was sort of the beginning of a lot of moves. After that, I think we moved 5 times in 2 years. And we had our first 2 children during that time. Like I gave birth to my daughter. And 3 weeks later we moved. And so, I mean, that became, for me personally, a very like hectic and time. And, I was seeing a therapist at the time and she was like, you seem to be like handling it all really well. And I'm like, well, inside, I do not feel like I'm handling it well. Stressful also, like you have no control, right, over what's happening. It's like things, I mean, can change 100% in like less than 24 hours. It's like when he signed with the team, it was like, he's like, well, I signed the contract and I'm leaving tonight. And I was like, okay, like, and then you as the wife sort of have to like figure everything out, right? You have to like, okay, like pack up the house and when are we moving and get a new house. And, Chris really had to focus on his job and didn't, it's like when you go get into a new team, but particularly, it's like hit the ground running. And so, yeah, that was bringing kids into it definitely made it a lot more stressful, I thought.
Yeah. And I have to say, because that's one of the things, reason why Cynthia and I started the podcast, because it's really important for people that, they think, oh, you're in the NFL, everything's glamorous, right? That there's all these different things, but you don't think about what it is. Like, as you said, you just gave birth, then Chris is moving, you have all these hormones, you're trying to juggle all these things. I mean, I remember when Cynthia and I was on my podcast, my first podcast, and she said about like moving. And I was like really thinking as a mom, as a businesswoman, all these different things. That just brings it to this whole other layer. And I remember being like, oh my God, all the dentists and doctors you have to find when you have kids. Like we've moved, but we've moved by choice. And, that's like all of those things those little minute things that people don't think about, that you really have to be built a certain way and mentally. I mean, we've talked about this often, and there's so much mentalness in life, period. If you don't have that strong mental capabilities, you're not going to get to that next level, or you're not going to be able to survive these kind of transitions and pivoting in life. So, I mean, thank you for even just picturing that, because I actually got like, a little sweaty. I just have a baby and then I'm moving, and like I was like, you could feel it. And that has to be, and then as you said, Chris, even if he's like, an empathetic husband wanting to be there with you, he's got to focus on his job. And you can't, then take your like, oh my God, all these different things and put them on Chris, because it's like Chris has to do his thing because this is his business. So you have to be really built in a very certain way to be able to make it at that level as a professional athlete and a professional athlete spouse. Can either of you talk on that? And I know, Cynthia, you can jump in as well.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that in some ways, professional, athletes significant others in general, I think people think it's much more glamorous than it actually is. And, it's like we do have the luxury of, having the financial means to hire people, but a lot of things, if you really want them done right, you have to be, you're still the captain of the ship. And a lot of times, things don't go as planned, or you can't find the right person for the job. And, a lot of times, like with my, girlfriends would, I did have like supportive family and friends who would like fly in to help, but we'd be laughing. I'm like, if anyone knew that we were like, they would never believe, like I'm schlepping like, these huge boxes up like 3 flights of stairs and just like, and like saying like, we're talking about me giving birth. It's like, I was in a city where I really knew no one when Chris went to another team. And I was like, I had a 1.5-year-old, and I was like, well, if I go into labor, like I have no idea what I'm going to do with him. And so like, I just hope dad makes it home before, like, yeah, you do have to, there's a lot of like stressors I don't think that people think about. A lot of times you're in cities where you don't have any family or friends. And I'm like, I will say like I felt, other wives on your team were like, my lifeline for sure. It's one thing I definitely miss now that we're out of football is like, I felt like other women were like, what do you need? Like, how can I help you? Which was, we had a lot in common, and you kind of knew what other people were going through, but I'll let Chris give his perspective.
It's that whole understanding. Yes. And I would love Chris to jump in it, but it's the whole understanding. And that's why, again, having platforms that we can share stories is so important, because stories do connect us, but it's that, oh, I understand. And now a woman can hear that and be like, oh my gosh, right. I didn't think of that. And I didn't think of that. And then that just puts a little bit more, we can be softer with each other. So Chris, can you, jump in and talk about from your side as, being a new dad, and I'm sure you could hear your heart. So like, you're someone that wants to be there helping. You don't want to see your wife having to be like, oh, I'm flailing. How do you keep yourself so focused? If you can take us through that a little bit.
Yeah, it was a difficult time and different in many ways, because we didn't have children during the beginning stages of my career. So I was entering my 7th season once we had my first son. And so we weren't accustomed to having kids and being in a place, right? And then, that's an adjustment in your relationship with your spouse, having a kid. And it was a part of my career, and I'm sure both of you two can relate to this, is that most of the time in the NFL, once you're coming to the end of your career, it doesn't end exactly how you want it to end, right? It's not exactly how you want it to be. There's different struggles. So to get concrete, and like I wanted to finish my career in Baltimore. I had signed a 4-year contract to do so, but I was injured most of that season for the first time in my career. So that was tough. Missed about half the season due to injuries. And I knew that I was going to get released because I was scheduled to get paid a pretty decent salary for the 2012 season. And the people who played in my absence played well, and they were younger, and they were going to get paid. They could pay them less. So I knew at the end of the season that was most likely going to be my last season there in Baltimore. And at that time, I think Sarah had a good support system there. We had been there for 3 years. I loved playing on the team there. And then I got signed with Minnesota. And from the way the facility looked to the way the coaches coached, just everything about it was just subpar in my view. When you go from one job where you really respect everyone, and there were some great people there too, but when you feel like it's a step below than where you were at, it becomes more difficult, right? And so during this time, you're at different organizations, and it was a time where I kind of knew that the end was approaching, right? My body wasn't feeling as good, and I felt like I had played to the point where it's not like we need to keep doing this financially, right? And being considered as just a veteran backup player is harder when you are used to starting. So there was a lot of different aspects during this time. But I think as the kids got older, I never realized how much I was going to love my kids until, you have them, right? You hear stories, but it really is something, having kids. I mean, they're by far the best thing that's ever happened to me. So that was a great aspect of it. But there was just football wise, it was less enjoyable, just from the business standpoint. And from my body, just feels like I just always had all these little injuries that would come up and show. And so it was kind of like at the end of the marathon. It's like you're right, you run all those miles, your body hurts, you're thirsty, you're just trying to get past the finish line. And when it's like that, it becomes less enjoyable. And I think that's partly why the pivot to something else wasn't as difficult as I think a lot of the stories from other NFL players, because I already knew that I wanted to be an attorney. And just the way things happened at the end and just the changes, it just seemed like, okay, it's time to give this up.
Right. So thank you for explaining that and laying it out, because again, it just gives people thoughts. So you then decided, as Sarah said, when she met you, you wanted to be an attorney. So that was something you always knew. So was that something you dove right into and jumped right into law school, or, getting prepared for law school? I should take that back.
Yeah. So I was actually all prepared for law school in 2005. The year that I graduated, because I wasn't sure that I was going to make the team. So the plan was, if I do get a chance to get a tryout or get signed by an NFL team, I'll do that. Then if I get released, then I'll go to law school immediately after, whenever the next semester starts. So all my LSAT and my letters of recommendation and everything expired after 5 years. So when I was in Baltimore, I forget what year, during the summer, I did everything again. So I already had everything ready. And going into the 2013 season, I knew that was going to be the last season. And so I think I might have applied for law schools maybe towards the end of the season, for 2014. So I went straight into law school. I went to George Washington University. We moved here. We live in Arlington, Virginia still, and we moved to Arlington. We live in a different house than we did in 2014, but it was 2 miles away from George Washington's campus in Washington, D.C. So went straight into it. And it was great for me in a lot of ways, because it was just, number one, just the weight of the pressure. It's just off your shoulder, right? The pressure of having one exam and one final, and that's it. That's your grade. Like, that's pressure, but that's not until the end, right? Like, that's not until the end. Whereas the NFL is like this constant pressure of, you can get released. Like, if you have a couple of bad games, you're going to be cut. And especially I think playing corner too. Playing corner is a very stressful position, because you're out there on an island. And if you mess up, everyone's going to see it, right? And everyone's going to blame you first if you don't perform the way they expect you to perform. And I knew from 2003 or 2002, I forget, when I took constitutional law in undergrad, I knew that I wanted to be an attorney. And I felt like I had found something it was the first time I had found something that I loved more than sports. And so it was when I was in law school, number one, everything was new, and learning new things. I just loved that. And just being in that environment, and this is where I felt like this is what I'm supposed to do. When it comes to that aspect of it, that transition really was, in that sense, joyful, really joyful.
I'd like to say that I did watch an interview of yours where you talk about that moment, and you talk about the professor that so inspired you, just in his tactics, and that you actually said that you felt more excited about that class than the game. And for me, I feel like that's such an important message, because there is that next thing for all of us. It's just finding what gives you that same rush, what gives you that adrenaline. And so if you could talk about that class and the impact that professor had on you.
Yeah, it was Todd Lochner. He was a constitutional law professor, and I remember he would, whatever the constitutional issue was, whether Commerce Clause or freedom of speech or freedom of religion, he would come in and take one viewpoint of the law, and he was like, the law should be this. Even if it said something contrary, this is what the law should be. And then he would just um, calling people randomly. So you have to be prepared in class for class. Like, what did you think? What about this hypothetical? What about this counterfactual? What do you think? And really challenge you in that aspect. And then the next day he'd come in and he would take the other side. And then he would just destroy everyone using the other side, right? And it was the first time in my life when I think about it made me really think about, wow, a lot of these issues that we might think are so simple based on our own understanding or our own biases really aren't that simple, right? And just that seriousness that he had, that he brought to the classroom, and the way he challenged us, yeah. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was very inspiring, and I think too when I think about now the pivot and thinking about what I would say to people who are in the NFL or who are in college and they're playing football is really trying to find time to find something that you love to do. If football is something that you love to do, then going in and coaching afterwards and setting yourself to do that is probably really joyful. Gerald Alexander played with me at Boise State. He played in the NFL for about 5 years. He's a coach now, and he loves coaching more than he ever did playing football, right? Because he really loves football. And when I see him, I talk to him, I see how his eyes light up. I just think it's great, right? But I knew, like, for some people, it's not like that, right? And so, and I think some people, they might, even if football coaching is not going to be as enjoyable as playing, I think there's still a lot of coaches who enjoy it. But there's other players that don't have the personalities to be coaches, and obviously they can't play sports forever. And so I think the key is with anyone is trying to just be curious and trying to find things that spark our interests, right? And I think that, because on the one hand, you have to put your full attention in the football and being the best you can, or you're not going to play very long. But on the other hand, I think the NFL does have a lot of avenues, and during the off season, there's a lot of times to explore and develop your interests and trying to find out what you really love. And I think if more players are able to take advantage of those opportunities, right, whether that's in college or in the NFL, I think that will set up their time afterwards, because they'll have more of an idea of what they really want to do. Because I think it becomes more difficult that when you finish and you don't really have a solid goal or game plan of what you're going to do next, I think it could be very, very difficult, I think.
Yeah. And thank you. And it's the purpose. Sin, did you want to?
Yeah, it's funny because really that is so much the premise of why I wanted to start Thread, was because for the women, I felt that way. And Sarah, you mentioned steering the ship. And I always refer to that as, because that's what we do so often, is steer the ship through all the transitions, through all the moves, as we navigated in and as we were there and as we navigated out. And I felt that it was so important that we connect, because we need to promote each other as we do that next thing. And I can't wait to talk to you about your decision to step in and that next thing for you, after so many years in the NFL and so many years with, the children and doing what you do. And now we're at work, but now you're doing something new. And I want to talk about that.
Yes. So, I found something that fits into my life. My kids are older, not babies, but they're still young. So something I could still do from home and, when I can or whatnot. But how I got into it was, Chris, from, his injuries, was having back pain, and we did all the MRIs and doing all the things. And, as it would flare up and here and there, He was taking a lot of ibuprofen, and he played in the days of like, when he took Toradol every week. And, a lot of former players have, kidney and liver, damage from, taking all the medications and things like that. And so I was like, I would really like to like, find something that, more holistic. And a friend introduced me to like hemp-based products. And so I was like telling my sister, and she actually has multiple sclerosis, and she was like, oh, my MS doctor has, recommended, a lot of people know it as like CBD, but like cannabinoids in general support your endocannabinoid system. And, so I said, Chris, like, well, like ask your doctor and see what he thinks. And so that was my introduction into hemp-based products. And then as I learned like more about it and saw how they can help people, and I found a company, like I'm very also into like the clean living and, not putting anything toxic and like everything organic, and, their extraction process and just the, every product that they have, there's a QR code, their transparency of like what is actually in it. The farms are in the US, and everything from the growing to the packaging happens on the farm. And so it was like, like you said, like Chris was saying, like something that sparks joy. Like this was not something that I ever planned on getting into. I mean, even though I wasn't like the holistic, clean living type just for my everyday life. And I love to like help people too. And so to, educate and introduce people to something that could possibly help them was really exciting. And I feel like Chris too has like really inspired me, as he's pivoted and really, I feel like done it really well. And he loves what he does. I mean, work can always be work, even if it's your dream job, but he really loves what he does. And I was like, I'd been, like I said, a dental hygienist, but I just didn't want to, when I thought about like, like possibly like, leaving my kids or going back to that, it was just always this like, I don't want to do that. And I was like, I really want to do what he's done. And I do believe in pivoting. And, sometimes I know people are like, oh, we're getting older. You should just stick with what you know. And I'm always like so inspired by the other people who pivot and like do whatever it is that really sparks joy in them. And so, I was just kind of like waiting and praying and, like maybe something will come along. And so anyways, it's been an exciting new chapter.
I love that. And when we do, we pivot. And I mean, Cynthia and I talk about this often, and I am all about curiosities. I have reinvented myself a million times, and I go where I know I can grow. And all of my little stepping stones have brought me to what I'm doing. And it's that curiosity. It's being comfortable in who you are, but also not jumping around. It's like, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do this. But putting your toe into things, listening, networking, talking to people. So people can find you, Sarah, at Sarah, and that is with an H. 3 is the number, CARR. And I definitely want to talk to you a little bit about it. My older son is a soccer player. He's actually just got recruited, and he's going to be going to Newberry College. He had fractured both sides of his pelvis playing. Oh. It's crazy, crazy story. But he built himself up. Chris, you would, when you're talking about injury, this kid literally, it's been his dream to play in college. He built him, for a year, trained every day, has this, really intense training that he put himself on. He did it all himself. This is when he was like, 16, 17. It's been incredible. But someone just was saying to us, you really should look into some CBD stuff for him, because he is training now again, because in 4 months he's going to school, and he's got a goal. He doesn't, he wants to get playing time as a freshman and all these different things. And so when Cynthia said, we were talking to you, I was like, I love when divine timing, and you guys, your meeting and all of these different things, right? Your relationship. Sorry, it's all of those kind of things that when we meet, it is, it's wonderful. So people can find you there. I'm going to definitely, send you a message to talk to you a little bit about it too, because I want to learn more and see what you recommend, for my son, because it's again, it's making connections and talking, and stories connect us. So I really appreciate you guys coming on YNS Live with NFL Thread here live on Fireside.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Well, thank you for having us. This is so fun.
Yeah, I like the.
And I look forward to talking to you.
Yes, I will. Oh, Cindy, you're muted, I think. Yep, you're muted.
Yes, I'm just so happy to share. What I love most is we take some wonderful clips from this conversation and quotes and just put them out there and push them out there to lead people to hear this great conversation. And when we do that, we'll also lead to the great things that you guys are doing in your careers. And I just think it speaks volumes for what people have the potential to do and grow and do. So thanks for sharing that.
Well, thank you. Very nice meeting both of you.
You too.
Yeah, so nice to meet you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for joining YNS Live with NFL Thread.